The Willamette Valley has not seen a major flooding event in almost 20 years, but are we prepared for the next one? Cameron Landfield sat down with a hydrologist to see whether rivers are at risk.
You constantly hear the KEZI weather team use the term valley when we talk about our area. Obviously, that's because many of us here live in the Willamette Valley. Valleys are depressions with terrain flanked by mountains, and with that kind of topography and so much precipitation here in western Oregon, there is a unique lingering threat.
Flooding. In a valley, liquids roll into the lowest point, so when enough liquid is added, our rivers and waterways can quickly be overwhelmed and overflow with some disastrous consequences. The last major flood around here was in 1996 and was caused by the perfect storm of near-record rainfall followed by rapid snowpack melting. This event did upwards of $65 million of damage and took the lives of 8 people. To explore the ongoing threat of flooding in the valley, I got a hold of an expert with the United States Geological Survey.
If we do have some sort of catastrophic flooding, how likely is that on any year?
The way I think of it is in terms of how often do we have extensive property damage. And for the Willamette in particular, it's not that common. And since the last dam was put in place in the Willamette Valley in 1969, we've only reached the moderate flooding stage once. That was the big February 1996 flood.
Adam provided some technical information to differentiate the National Weather Service categories of flood damage. Clearly, moderate flooding is still a significant threat on the lives of the people who are exposed to it. It also needs to be noted that Adam was very clear in informing me that almost any flood-related questions would have super different answers based on the location, since flood phenomena is extremely site-specific. For instance, the Long Tom River at Monroe hits near and minor flood state relatively regularly. He gave me a few more examples of interesting areas.
I think of the Nehalem River around Vernonia. That is an area of flooding interest where we have issues at times. Along the Willamette, Corvallis is more likely to get flooded than, say, Albany. So if there's a really big storm there, we might have issues.
What would be the worst case scenario?
Me, the worst case scenario that I can imagine is the 1861 flood. Of course, that predates all dams, but that was a flood that wiped out entire towns.
I asked about how quickly flooding can take a turn for the worst. Once again, this was a site-specific situation.
If you think of something like the 1903 flood in Heppner in eastern Oregon, that was, probably out of the blue for those residents. It was just an intense thunderstorm that happened out of nowhere and, killed quite a few people, unfortunately. Compare that to the 96 flood that we had, which was a much more regional flood. For something that big, we won't be caught off guard quite as likely.
Adam's response here led directly into another important question involving the conditions necessary for problematic flooding.
If you look at the biggest floods we've had in the valley, the 1996 flood, the 1964 Christmas flood, the 1861 flood, they're all a result of having a fair amount of snowpack and then a big storm front coming through and melting that snow rapidly. And oftentimes it melts it so rapidly that the frozen ground underneath is still frozen.
I asked Adam what kind of advances had happened in the science since the flood in 1996.
We've got much more data than we used to, a bigger network of gauges. The data has been around for longer, so we know more about the data and what they mean. We have better computing power, better models and forecasting tools.